It's a great day to wake up to see World War III trending once again on X. Formerly Twitter, World War III is once again trending as fears that we will actually enter World War III are ramping up after Macron of France said nothing's out of the realm of possibility, including sending Western troops into Ukraine. The Kremlin says, this is Vladimir Putin, that should Western forces enter Ukraine, it will be full-scale war between Russia and NATO, which likely would then pull in China, triggering a bunch of regional conflicts across the planet, and probably resulting in World War III. And then we have Vladimir Putin. Vladimir, on top of what he's already said, many in his circle have warned of using nuclear weapons, and that's a real possibility. Now we have a NATO chief saying that Ukraine will join NATO. It's just a matter of time, which was, something that Putin said you cannot do to NATO. He said, if Ukraine joins you guys, it's war. In fact, it could be nuclear war now. We've talked about this over the past couple of years. Let's talk about the prospect of nuclear war in a World War III scenario. Yeah, I think it's highly likely. A lot of people want to say mutually assured destruction will prevent the use of nuclear weapons. Wrong. I say wrong. And this is why we need de-escalation fast. You see, most people don't understand what nuclear weapons are, and they assume we're talking about Moscow launching intercontinental ballistic missiles into outer space, which then deploy several warheads and pepper the eastern seaboard. Yeah, that seems very, very unlikely. Unless, of course, the U.S. actually invades Russia. I should say NATO. What's the difference? No, the reality is you'll likely see the use of tactical nuclear weapons on the battlefield. Why not? We saw the mother of all bombs used in Afghanistan. It was massive. And this was a massive conventional explosive device. But why wouldn't Putin, if he's looking at losing ground in Ukraine, and Ukraine is what? It means the borderland to them. Why would he not just say flatten it? Low yield, tactical nuclear artillery or something like this. Strategic, whatever. Fire it up. We're talking maybe 100 kiloton bomb. Smash Kiev and shut down enemy forces. No one in NATO is going to retaliate to a battlefield nuke with a strike on a foreign capital because the retaliation would be on them. Of course, Vladimir Putin and other world leaders know if they use low-scale nuclear weapons on the battlefield, they will likely just see other low-scale nuclear weapons. But everyone's going to be basically say, we're not going to nuke Moscow, we're not going to nuke DC because that would be mutually assured destruction. And I'm not even convinced mutually assured destruction is a guarantee. In the event that, say, NATO does press against the borders of Russia, I'm not even entirely convinced that Russia is going to decide to launch a bunch of nukes. But we'll see. We've got some news to go through. Let me break this down for you so I can show you what's going on. And another grain of sand added to the heap. It's a year ago we're talking about World War III. It's a year before. Understand, history condenses everything for us. So when we're reading about how these wars begin, we read, this is fascinating. I seriously, people. The American Revolution started 1 year before the signing of the Declaration of Independence, and arguably 10 years before, depending on what you would describe as the Revolutionary period. Most people think, and you can see this in our fiction, you watch movies about the American Revolution, you watch TV shows, and they often will depict it as the Founding Fathers declared independence and the Crown responded with war. No. The Crown was already attacking and engaged in conflict with revolutionaries. Lexington and Concord took place 1 year and a month before the signing of the Declaration of Independence, and those were the battles that started the American Revolution. So right now, understand this. Every day when you're reading the news, we will be talking about the fears and the escalation of what's going on in Ukraine and Israel and the Red Sea, Iran, China, Venezuela, and it will be a slow march towards total annihilation. It may come to the point where there is international conflict on a great scale, massive economic depression, and disease and famine because of the conflict occurring around the world. If this war does escalate, global trade will effectively be shuttered. I mean, it'll exist, but understand when it comes to war, supply lines are the first to go. Do you think that if we go to war with Russia, China stays out of it? Do you think that China would just allow Western vessels and allies to ship goods? Do you think China would keep sending goods and materials to the U.S.? I hope America is ready for what happens when all those made in China products cease to exist. Here's the latest news from Express, and then we'll go through why there's a real fear of World War III. World War III fears surge as horror map shows Putin preparing for large-scale war with NATO. The Institute for the Study of War has warned that Russia is preparing for a potential future large-scale conventional war against NATO. Of course they are. Macron says, take a look at this. Nothing is ruled out, including using Western troops to stop Russia winning Ukraine war. When France comes out and says, we will deploy NATO troops into Ukraine, into next door to you, and we will defeat you in war, what do you think Russia's going to do? Do you think Russia's going to be like, let's do nothing? No. Russia, of course, is going to say, all right, gear up. There's a very real possibility we're going to war with NATO. In fact, Russia has already stated they are at war with NATO. No sane person paying attention to this conflict believes that the war in Ukraine is Ukraine versus Russia. It is quite literally NATO versus Russia, with NATO standing back and biding their time. And of course, they want to report over and over again that Russia is losing. Russia is losing. They're not. Russia has not yet begun to fight. They say all of this nonsense, but it's an absurdity. Now, Russia's what, 60 million people? How many? Let's make sure we can get this number right. Russian population. Maybe it's more than that. Yeah. Oh, I'm way off. It's double that. 143 million people make up Russia. So my point there was Europe is 600 million. The U.S. is 300 million. Russia by itself is not the real risk. It's when China gets pulled in. It's when China says, okay, you want full-scale war in Europe? I will take this opportunity to regain control of Taiwan. Will the U.S. be able to do anything about it? The U.S. has been working with Australia on a defensive plan for the Pacific in the Southeast Asia region. Japan, of course, has been prepared. South Korea is getting prepared. And so what are they going to do? How will they stop China? And what will China do as it continues to press upon these Pacific atolls, building military bases, and expanding in the South China Sea? World War III fears have surged again after U.S. defense analysts released maps of military restructuring that they warn show Vladimir Putin is preparing Russia for a large-scale conflict with NATO. It is the latest in a string of warnings that the world is teetering on the edge of global conflict. Earlier this year, UK Defense Secretary Grant Shapps said the world is now in a pre-war phase ahead of a possible World War III. The World War rhetoric has ramped up significantly in the past 7 days, with fresh warning signs coming from China and Europe in a major escalation of the World War III threat. Beijing has started recruiting civilian soldiers. Yeah. Do they like to mention that Europe is doing the same thing? Meanwhile, closer to home, Latvia has urged the UK to consider bringing back conscription, help bolster Europe's defense efforts against Russia. It comes after Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko, a key Putin ally, warned the West it was on the edge of the abyss of global conflict. Sweden has conscription. I believe Germany has begun discussing the need of a civilian armed army. You've now got Latvia calling on the UK and individuals in the UK, military officials, calling on UK to begin drafting. Here's the game they're playing. They're saying, no, we don't want to conscript people and we don't want to force them to go to war. We need civilian defense training. What are they basically saying? They want to put weapons and training in the hands of civilians to serve as a national guard. The armed forces will be deployed. If you've enlisted or you're commissioned, you get deployed to the front line. If you're a baker and you're of fighting age, they will put a gun in your hand and say, you are now under our command and you will defend this portion of our homeland. It's not just China that is preparing for full-scale war. It's basically everybody. They say now the Russian president has signed a decree that officially reinstates the Moscow and Leningrad military districts in Western Russia. The move codifies the Kremlin's major military restructuring and reform efforts. We have I think there's a map here. You can take a look. They have recodified their military districts, and they are preparing for war. The Institute for the Study of War says Russian President Vladimir Putin signed 2 decrees on February 26 that officially reestablished the Moscow and Leningrad military districts, codifying major Russian military restructuring and reform efforts. Let's pull up the other 2 tweets in this thread. The formal transfer of regions previously under the responsibility of the Northern Fleet is likely part of a wider Russian effort to reestablish military district commands as the primary headquarters for ground forces, while reassigning naval assets to the Russian Navy. The recreation of the MMD and the LMD supports the parallel objectives of consolidating control over Russian operations in Ukraine in the short to medium term and preparing for a potential future large-scale conventional war against NATO in the long term. Russia's won the war in Ukraine. The West is refusing to accept it. But, we have the tweet right here. Let's see if this is an image we can pull up. Russia has secured control of the Donbass region into Crimea, which was their principal objective. We can see here it says assessed Russian-controlled Ukrainian territory, assessed Russian advances in Ukraine, and Russian-controlled Ukrainian territory before February 24th. What they're saying is, they're basically saying this colored area, Russia's got it. NATO and the West will not stand for this. They want full control of Ukraine, and they, I do believe it's fair to say, want to destroy Russia. No question. Tucker Carlson interviewed Vladimir Putin, and Putin said that he asked in the 90s if Russia could join NATO. He asked Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton said, I think so, yeah. Bill Clinton then, they went off separate ways for the evening, came back later at dinner and said, I don't think it'll happen. Putin's position was that what he believed. NATO, while it has many voting member states, the United States is the principal power of NATO. And so long as the United States it has full control over what all these European nations basically do. It exerts tremendous pressure. Were Russia to have joined, it would rival the voting power of the U.S. and could shift the discussions in these NATO voting states. And thus, Russia must be subdued. It's too big. It's interesting, though. If Russia were to join, what is the purpose of NATO? Why would NATO exist? NATO was basically created to oppose the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union collapses. Russia says, why don't we join? It'd be great. And then you've got a massive militaristic bloc. But the U.S. didn't want to risk sharing power. That's at least what Vladimir Putin said. There could be other reasons. Russia was the principal enemy of NATO when it was part of the Soviet Union. So why trust it? Just because the Soviet Union had dissolved doesn't mean that these intelligence forces and those who oppose the West doesn't mean they're still not. It doesn't mean they've stopped operating. Now, here's where things get spicy. Macron says nothing ruled out, including using Western troops to stop Russia winning Ukraine war. Oh boy! French President Emmanuel Macron has openly discussed the possibility of sending European troops to Ukraine to help Kiev win the war against Russia. A potential major escalation to the largest ground war Europe has seen since World War II. Which it currently is. The possibility of Western democracies putting boots on the ground in Ukraine remains remote. Macron's comments following a summit in support of Ukraine prompted a hawkish response from the Kremlin and sent European leaders scrambling to backtrack. Here's the report from Reuters. Kremlin warns of conflict with NATO if alliance troops fight in Ukraine. Alliance. Here we go, baby. Listen. Whenever there is a preparation for war, you have to understand that language is so important in framing the worldview. You know what's fascinating? Many of you probably know this. Very few of you probably don't. But there are many languages that have words that can't translate into English. And I remember being younger and thinking to myself, how could you not translate a word? And it's like, well, we can try to describe it. For instance, there's a story out of San Francisco where a non-citizen was just appointed to their election commission. And this, or was it San Francisco? It might have been Sacramento. I don't know. It's in California somewhere. I think it was SF. This individual is Chinese, from Hong Kong, speaks Mandarin and Cantonese. And she said, there is no word for reparations in Mandarin or Cantonese. So how do you explain the concept? It's fascinating, right? If there is no word for such a thing, you have to ask yourself, why is there not a word for this? And once you do, you have to ask yourself, do they understand or would they agree with the concept? The point is this. Reparations What does it mean? It basically means payment to a group of people based on past grievances, and it typically refers to the government taxing the people or taking public funds to pay one particular group of people for grievances suffered in the past. Notably, internment of the Japanese in World War II, or right now a big push from Democrats is, and it has been, it's fake, it's for votes, but reparations to the descendants of slaves, though there have been some pushes. In China, they don't have a concept for this, meaning there is nothing in their culture that says if you've been wronged in the past, if your people were wronged in the past, you deserve something today. They don't have that concept. It doesn't exist in their cultural mindset, so it's not going to happen. The reason the word doesn't exist is because it doesn't need to exist because they don't have that concept. They don't believe it's something that they should do or exists. It's fascinating. The Kremlin warns of conflict with NATO if alliance troops. You see, here we go. They'll now they will begin the process of creating a worldview around what's going on. Like with World War II, the Allies, they are now in the media already saying we are the alliance troops. They are gearing up for World War III. The Kremlin warned on Tuesday that conflict between Russia and the U.S.-led NATO military alliance, would be inevitable if European members of NATO sent troops to fight in Ukraine. The war in Ukraine has triggered the worst crisis in Russia's relations with the West since 1962 Cuban Missile Crisis, and President Vladimir Putin has previously warned of the dangers of a direct confrontation. Okay, well, in response to this, NATO has denied any plans to send troops to Ukraine. Who cares? Who cares what NATO says? They absolutely will. Ain't nobody's buying it. And why would Vladimir Putin think that this story is legitimate? In this story from Euromaidan Press, Ukraine joining NATO is a matter of when, not if, NATO chief says. So the chief of NATO comes out and says Ukraine will join NATO, but don't worry, we're not going to deploy NATO troops to Ukraine. How does that make sense? It doesn't. The reality is, efforts to backtrack are likely for our benefit. They want to assure citizens of these Western nations there's not going to be a war. Calm down. Why? Nobody wants this. And people of Ukraine don't want to lose, and I get it, but that country has been flattened. And there's nothing much left. They're conscripting young women. Zelensky is begging for our money. I say we should not have been involved. We should not be involved, and we should leave and abandon them now. I don't care for World War III with Russia over the Donbass region. If y'all are so concerned about Vladimir Putin invading Poland, then start bolstering your defenses in Poland. Ukraine is not NATO. But you can see what the real intentions are of Western forces. They want us to believe that Russia is starting the war. And I mean World War III. Certainly, Russia started the war in in Ukraine. That's a fact. Russia invaded Ukraine. Fact. You know, my view of this is the West has been winning with soft power, and Russia will not tolerate anymore. So Russia escalates. So there is a fair point in Western provocation. Why would Russia tolerate the seizure of Crimea? It really comes down to this. When Yanukovych was ousted in Ukraine, Russia basically says, if Ukraine joins NATO, we lose our military base in Sevastopol, Crimea. So what did they do? A referendum was held, whether you believe it was legitimate or not, and Russia seizes Crimea. But Russia doesn't have strong land access. In order to take Crimea and hold it, they needed the Donbass region, which is what I showed. It goes down along the southeastern portion of Ukraine. There was a bombing on the bridge that connects Crimea to Russia. That shows the vulnerability of this. It shows the vulnerability that Russia is facing and why Russia needs the Donbass. Russia now has it, and that's likely where they will stay. The West is claiming, no, they'll advance on Poland and what? Why? You think Russia wants to be forced into a ground war with NATO? 1 billion people? No, he doesn't. China's not going to appreciate that either. But Russia's not going to back down with NATO pressing on its border in the way it is and cutting it off from the Black Sea. So Russia's moves are obvious and inevitable. It's a game of chess, my friends. I know that if I make this move, my opponent must make one of 4 moves. Right? That's how you play chess. I'm not a chess master or anything. But They could do something sporadic, and it was really fascinating. I was watching a video about chess AI, and human players will think to themselves, I've got 5 potential moves to gain advantage. If I make one, what move will my opponent make? NATO knows the moves it is making against Russia will force Russia to make a variety of moves. What we are seeing now with the military districts in Russia, entirely predictable. They knew that was going to happen because Russia, smaller and weaker, and so it has to play certain moves. It could give up, sure, but it's not going to. Everything we're seeing now is basically a domino falling over. Russia knows it, and we know it. The question now becomes how long until this erupts or someone backs down in this game of chicken. I don't think anyone will. I don't think we will see anyone backing down. You take a look at what just happened at the Super Bowl, that shooting. And what was it? Some dudes walked up to a guy and said, "What are you looking at?" He said, "What are you looking at?" They said, "What are you looking at?" Then they started getting mad at each other, pumping their chests, and a guy pulled out a gun, the other guy pulled out a gun. They started shooting at each other. Over what? What are you looking at? That's it. This is the nature of the dominoes falling over. The West won't back down and Russia won't back down, so both know that it's an inevitability. The game of chicken will end with both vehicles crashing full speed into each other and World War III. So here we go, baby. BRICS. Look at this. The official BRICS account, bringing you unparalleled, unbiased coverage of all things BRICS in real time. So I don't know. I'm not sure this is the actual BRICS governmental Twitter account or whatever, but it's got the golden check mark. Just in, Ukraine will join NATO, chief says. You think they're going to be happy about that? Here we go. This one's from 2 days ago from the mirror.co.uk. Ukraine must win war by November or Putin could start World War III, warn ex-military chiefs. Interesting. Everybody's wondering how the domestic election will play out. You know, the issue is that they can't let Donald Trump win, but Joe Biden's certainly not the man to run. What are they going to do? World War III, maybe? I have some thoughts and some fears. You know, I can only speculate. We've talked about the potential that Joe Biden gets hurt on stage and Gavin Newsom runs out and saves him. There's a lot of scenarios. I know these deep state intelligence guys who have the real plans are sitting back, smiling, smoking their cigars, being like, he is so far off. He has no idea what's coming. When you look at this, maybe something happens to Joe Biden and Putin is blamed. Maybe Biden visits Europe. Something happens. The American president loses his life. Kamala Harris steps in as acting president, refuses to campaign and run at a time of crisis, triggering a massive international conflict, disrupting U.S. elections. I don't know. I don't know what'll happen. I can only tell you that we've been tracking this for some time, and there is no end in sight, only escalation. So, you know, I hope not. I think people need to realize just how good life is. Sitting in your lounge chair, you can get a massage chair on Amazon for like $600. And you can watch the Super Bowl and argue over Taylor Swift and order your chicken wings and eat your pizza. But people do not realize what international full-scale war will bring. You will be forced into labor. There will be limited food. Prices will skyrocket. And people will die. We'll see, man. Maybe none of that comes to fruition. Maybe Trump gets elected and everything just stops. Russia controls the Donbass. Trump says, we're not going to back Ukraine. We don't want World War III. And that's it. Or I don't know. Maybe Trump does that. Maybe Putin goes, haha, now's my chance. And then for some reason declares war on Europe. I have no idea. Ooh. Skateboard fell. I have no idea. All I know is that it seems to be escalating. I'll leave it there. Next segment is coming up at 1 p.m. on this channel. Thanks for hanging out, and I'll see you all then.